Right, in today's lesson, what we're going to understand is how we can start off a composition using a simple technique with the thing called the circle of fifths. And the first thing to understand, and I'll go over this quite briefly, is what is a fifth and why is it important? A fifth is literally the distance between two notes. It sounds like that. This is a fourth, this is a fifth, and we call it a fifth because it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 notes gap. And this relationship, this fifth relationship, is something we can utilise to create really effective compositions. So we'll start off with F, let's say, and go up 5 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to C. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to G. Keep going up 5, and we end up with a pattern that sounds like this. Eventually it goes up into the sharp notes. We'll worry about that later. All I'm going to do is, using that, I'm going to write those down on a little circle diagram that I have here. So the first note that I used was F, then it went up to a C, then it went to a G, then after that it went up to a D, after it went to a D, the next one was A, and then E, and so on all the way around. For now, the half of it will be just fine for what we're doing. It's also important to remember that each of these has a thing called a relative minor. So without going into too much detail, the relative minor of F is D. It's 3 semitones down. There's F, there's D. C has a relative minor, which is A. C, 3 semitones down, gets you an A. G has a relative minor, which is E. The next one, D has a relative minor, which is B. A has a relative minor, which is F sharp. E has a relative minor, C sharp. So without going into too much detail, that's basically how we come up with a circle of fifths. And what you can do is just go online, look for images of circle of fifths. There are hundreds of them. That's what we're going to use primarily as our compositional technique. So once you've gone all the way around the circle of fifths, you should have something that looks a little bit like this. Now you can obviously do an image search and you can find one, or you can make your own. It's up to you. What's important to understand here is that each of these represents a chord. All the ones on the outside, they're major chords. All the ones on the inside, they're minor chords. Now before we go any further, let's just understand exactly what we mean by major and minor chords. Now then, just a brief explanation of the difference between a major and a minor chord. Here's a major chord. It generally sounds quite happy, and here's a minor chord. It's got a sort of sadder sound to it. We can use that to our advantage later. The important thing to remember is that the chord is made up of the root, the fifth, and this one, the third. And where we put the third determines whether it's a major or a minor. If there are 3 semitones between the first and the fifth, it's a major chord. If there are only 2 semitones, it's a minor chord. This applies to all of them, whether it's F major or F minor, G major, G minor. It's the gap between the two, the first and the third, that determine whether it's a major or a minor chord. They're not always the same shape. On the piano, for example, A has a black note in the middle, but to make it a minor, it's 3 white notes. Again, it's that semitone gap, or 3 semitone gap, that makes the distinction. An easier way to illustrate it, if you look at the hammers on a piano hitting the strings, you can see those semitone gaps right in front of you. So if I play C, and I play it as a C major, I have the first, the third, and the fifth. And if we look up to the hammers on the strings, you can see there's 3 semitones between the first and the third. Doesn't matter where I put the chord, it's always going to be that same shape, 3 semitone gap between the note on the left and the one in the middle. It can be any chord you like, it will always be that shape. First, third, and fifth, major chord. If we look at the minor chord though, it's got that different tonal quality to it. This way it's the other way around. There's just a 2 semitone gap between the note on the left and the one in the middle, or the first and the third. Doesn't matter where I put the chord, it's that same shape, those same set of hammers go down. We can use this information to our advantage if we're inputting our chords into a DAW and we're using the piano roll. You can see it there on the piano roll, those 3 semitones or 2 semitones. But the important thing to remember here is that we have major chords on the outside of our circle, minor chords on the inside of our circle. And those relationships between those chords, the way that they're laid out on the circle, are going to be very, very useful to start composing, because when you start composing, you can sometimes draw a blank. But with this method, you can easily get the ball rolling and start composing some great music.